In the deepest hours of the night, when the world grows quiet and even distant sounds seem softened by darkness, the Middle Ages feel strangely close. It was an era when death was never far away, when the line between the living and the dead felt thin, fragile, and easily crossed. People did not hide death behind hospital walls or sealed coffins. They lived with it, slept beside it, and prepared for it from childhood. And in that world, some people chose to leave words behind in the place where words were never meant to survive, inside their graves, across medieval Europe. Archaeologists have uncovered graves that contain more than bones and dust hidden beneath. Skulls folded against rib cages, tucked inside coffins, or sewn into burial clothing. Small handwritten notes have been found, letters written by people who knew they were dying, messages composed in fear, hope, regret, and belief. These were not meant for historians and often not even meant for family. They were meant for God, for angels, for spirits, or for whoever might hear them after death. Medieval people believed the soul did not leave the body immediately. Some thought it lingered near the grave for days, weeks, or even years. Others believed the dead could hear prayers spoken above their burial place. And some believed that words buried with the body could guide the soul safely through the dangerous journey after death. A journey filled with judgment, temptation, and punishment. Many of these letters are painfully short. The writers were often sick, weak, or dying from plague, fever, or infected wounds. Their handwriting shakes, ink feeds, words trail off mid-sentence, but what remains is enough to reveal a haunting truth. Medieval people were terrified of being forgotten, and even more terrified of being judged alone. One of the most common types of letters found in graves were confessions, not spoken aloud, but written in secrecy in medieval Christian belief. Dying with unconfessed sins could condemn a soul to eternal suffering, but priests were not always available. Death could come suddenly. Villages could be isolated, and so some people confessed on paper instead. They wrote their sins, folded the page, and placed it with their body, hoping God would read what no priest had heard. In Germany, a 13th century grave revealed a parchment placed directly over the heart of a middle-aged man. The text was simple, direct, and filled with desperation. He confessed to lying, stealing food during famine, and abandoning a sick neighbor out of fear of infection. The final line read, "Lord, I write because I can no longer speak." The letter had been folded so many times that the creases nearly erased the ink, as if the man had held it in his hands again and again before dying. Other letters were written to the living, even though the writers knew they would never be read. These messages were often emotional, deeply personal, and almost painfully intimate. A young woman buried in northern France in the 14th century was found with a small note beneath her skull. It was written to her mother. She apologized for dying. She asked forgiveness for past disobedience. And she begged her mother not to blame herself. The letter ended with a chilling sentence. If I am allowed to return in dreams, I will come gently. Dreams were taken very seriously in the Middle Ages. People believed the dead could visit the living while they slept. A buried letter, then, was not the end of communication, but the beginning of a different kind. One that took place in silence, in sleep, in memory. Not all letters were sorrowful. Some were angry. Some were afraid. In a monastery cemetery in England, a monk was found buried with a scrap of paper hidden inside his sleeve. His letter was not addressed to God, but to the devil. He begged to be left alone. He wrote that he had lived in obedience, silence, and hunger, and that he had earned his rest. The tone was not pleading, but defensive, as if he expected something to come for him after death. This fear was not irrational. Medieval theology described death as the beginning of trials, not peace. Demons could tempt the dying soul. Angels could argue over its fate. Purgatory awaited most people, a place of suffering meant to cleanse sin. Letters, prayers, charms, and written words were seen as protection. Writing was power. In Eastern Europe, some graves contain letters that were not confessions, but instructions. They told the living how to behave. Do not open this grave. Do not move these bones. Do not speak my name at night. These messages reflect a belief that disturbing the dead could cause unrest. The fear of revenants, spirits, and walking corpses was very real. A wrong action could bring the dead back. One particularly unsettling discovery was made in a medieval cemetery in what is now Poland. A man was buried with a note pinned to his chest with an iron nail. The letter warned that if he returned, it was not by choice. It asked the living to forgive him in advance. His skull showed signs of post-mortem damage, suggesting the community feared he might rise again. The letter reads less like a farewell and more like a warning from someone who knew how he would be remembered. Children were not excluded from this practice. Though rare, a few child burials have included notes written by parents. These letters were filled with unbearable grief. Parents asked angels to protect their children. They apologized for failing to save them. One letter, found in Italy, was written by a father who buried his son during a plague outbreak. He wrote, "I leave you here because I must live. Forgive me." The letter was soaked with tears, the ink smeared beyond repair. What makes these letters so disturbing is not their age, but their familiarity. The fears are modern. The regrets are human. The hope that someone, somewhere, will listen after death is universal. Medieval people did not write for history. They wrote because silence was unbearable. Most of these letters were never meant to be read by the living. They were sealed away, hidden, buried with intention. And yet, centuries later, they were uncovered. The dead were heard. Their private words were brought into the light. This raises an unsettling question. If these messages survived, what else remains buried? How many voices were written and lost forever? How many fears dissolved into soil and darkness? The letters we have are only fragments of a much larger conversation between the living and the dead. In the quiet presence of these graves, it becomes clear that medieval people did not see death as an ending. It was a transition, a negotiation, a moment that required preparation and communication. Words mattered, even in the grave. And now, as you listen in the silence of night, you are part of that chain. A living mind receiving words meant for another world. The dead once feared being forgotten. But for a moment, as their letters are remembered, they are no longer alone. Their voices remain soft, their words remain fragile, but they are still here, waiting, beneath layers of earth, stone, and time, whispering patiently for someone to listen.